Hey, Mandy, welcome to 42 Canada.
All right, thank you for having me.
So, just to give people a little background about you, you are an expert in fundraising and the chief operating officer for the Oakville Hospital Foundation. Yes?
Yes,
Okay,
I've been with
great.
the organization for 23 years.
Awesome. And yeah, I think there's a lot of people really interested in expertise around fundraising, revenue diversification, all that kind of stuff. Always a big topic for nonprofit or community organizations. So we're going to be talking about that a bit, but also more broadly about how to build inclusive, healthy communities, leadership, and innovation.
Great.
So I want to start by just asking you how, like, what your background is and how you got into being involved in fundraising.
So my background is a lot of administrative pieces, project coordination, and that really dovetails well, I've discovered, with into the fundraising industry and the nonprofit sector. So there's lots of transferable skills in all of that, the customer service, the building relationships. It's really the basis of everything. And I have a commerce background uh, with my schooling, so that has dovetailed well with the fundraising piece.
And how did you actually get started?
When I moved to Ontario, I was looking for opportunities, and I actually started in the film industry in nonprofit, working with an organization that was organizing education sessions for their professional development. And that was a great segue to and skill builder for moving into hospital fundraising here.
Great. And what was your first job like?
My first job was all spreadsheets and tracking of information for a $10 million campaign for a new
I
MRO
Yeah, and I think you told me recently you sort of started on the bringing money in front, and
side.
then now
Yes,
you're on the managing how the money goes out or is used front.
that's true. Yes. So I've done lots of work on the money inside. It's my career's probably been 50-50, which is a great combination, great experience for both sides of the business. So really looking at how do we inspire people, inspire the community, and inspire individuals in the community because they want to have a forum to change the world. The people care, people are emotionally invested in the world that they live in, and they want to make a difference. And so giving them the opportunity to connect with causes that are important to them and showing them how they can make a difference to make changes in their world for them and their loved ones and their neighbors is really what fundraising is all about on the money inside.
Yeah, and I think I mean you did a lot of professional development and you're now like a certified fundraiser in some way,
Certified
right?
fundraising executive is the
Ah,
certification. So that's a combination of ongoing professional development, like other industries. Like if you were an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor, there's always professional development that you are is needed to keep up your skills and information and stay current. So it's that and the work experience and that combination is the certification.
what were some of the things that you learned as part of the certification process that you found really helpful?
There really are a lot of books about fundraising and strategy. The thing about fundraising is probably similar to other industries. It is a large percentage of strategy and thinking about how you're going to um, connect and find those right those best ways to inspire people and finding the best solutions that spark that joy in people and the interest in supporting the cause. So that background work and thinking is more than half the job.
And it's interesting, just thinking through, like, the way you're talking about fundraising is different than I've ever heard anyone talk about fundraising before. Usually, like fundraising, you think of, oh, a gala, an event, schmoozing, people with a lot of money, um, as well as, smaller donations, setting up systems for people to contribute smaller donations and so on. But I think with the hospital foundation, it's probably larger donations that you're really focused on, eh?
Well, I think with any cause, every donation is important and participation from the broadest range of people is important. So when you think about fundraising, you need to think about all the different ways that you can offer people to give and what resonates for them, because finding the route for them to give is just as important. So there are people that are really prefer to give in a social setting like a gala. There are people that really don't want to talk to anybody and feel a one-to-one pressure. It's kind of like going into Walmart. Do you like the greeter to talk to you, or do you really wish that they would just have gotten caught up with the person in front of you and you can just slip by? Uh, it's all personal preferences. So you really need to have a well-rounded, diversified program to speak to everybody, as many people as possible. So have that giving through the mail, those mail appeal letters, have some events. And that also, but the majority of your income in fundraising is from what we fondly call major gifts or leadership gifts. So it is the personalized one-to-one conversations that are really going to bear the largest fruit for the for both the organization and the person giving.
Yeah, so that really
It's to
sounds
me.
a lot like relationship building, like
It is.
and not something you do quickly. Like that's a longer term
That's
strategy, I
right.
would think. Is
That's
that
right.
the case? Like how do you start to build a relationship like that with someone?
So one of the best ways to start is to really think about the people that are interested in the cause. Who's reaching out to you for information? Who, if you have a community meeting about social housing or whatever your cause is, who's coming to that? Those are the most interested people. They're making the effort to come. So that's where you start. So it's we there's a little formula you can think about, LAI. So L is for linkage. So what kind of linkage do people have to the cause that you're working on? What kind of ability do they have? That's A for ability. So what is their ability in their discretionary income really to give a potential gift, and the size of the gift? And then what is their interest, which is the I. So, and that can be, so they don't necessarily have a linkage. So if I'm thinking about people that might want to support the hospital, if they've had a heart attack and had their life saved by the hospital, that they've, told us about, um, then they have a great linkage and a highly more likely than somebody that had, their third neighbor down the street tripped and broke their ankle and, got it set. And that isn't that great. So it's a greater and yeah.
Yeah, it's I was going to say when you are trying to start those conversations, I'm wondering what some of the biggest challenges are when you're trying to build those kinds of relationships.
I think the biggest challenge is, well, one, you don't want to come off like um, a nag or a pestering, cheesy salesperson or a stalker. So you're really looking, in all honesty, right?
Yep.
those are people's kind of worst nightmares of why they don't want to, that's why people don't want to answer the telephone anymore if they don't know who it is. You want to go slow and let not go slow necessarily. You want to go organically and authentically into the conversation. And I think that's the most important part, to show your passion. You are involved in a cause. If you're thinking about raising money for something, you are clearly passionate about your cause, and you have a subject expertise that you can share and talk about how with people in the community, with how they can make a difference. And one of the best ways that we have is to be able to share why we got involved, why we're passionate about it, and see if that resonates with the person that you're talking to. And if it resonates with them, then that's a good sign that the conversation can continue and build from there.
Right. So could we role play for a second here?
Sure.
Like pretend I'm a community person, and maybe you don't even know that much about me, or how would you start if you didn't know that much about me? Like, how would you even start a conversation? Or would it be that you would need to have heard that I might be interested in the cause in the first place in some way?
Oh, well, you don't, it doesn't have to. So for instance, we are out networking in the community in all kinds of different places. So we could have met, if you were a member of your local chamber and you're looking to network, that's a great way. Whatever it is, wherever you're meeting somebody, you know why you got there. So if it was an information session, like a residents association meeting, you know what you have in common. So you can build on that, just like any other getting to know you in any other social setting for any other purpose.
Right.
Yeah, I think don't make it too extravagant or build it up too much in your mind. You're really just the same as meeting anybody else and checking out, do these two people in a communication want to dance together?
Or well, or even I guess just like I'm just imagining being at a meeting or something, and if I was trying to and either I heard the person say something that made me think they might be open to a conversation, or I'm just saying, "Oh, hi. Um, what what brought you here today?" And just
Exactly,
sort of having
exactly.
a general conversation about the event or the meeting or whatever the brought you together, or a connection or something, and really focusing on understanding that person, what brought them to whatever the event was, who they are as a person, what their interests are, and as well, and doing it not just in the I want to find out about you kind of way, but in a, oh, I'm this is what I do, this is why I'm here, like a conversation, and then
Exactly.
see if this is something, and then at some point maybe saying, oh, I work for, would you be interested in having a further conversation about the hospital? And just,
And that's right. That's right. And
is that about it?
that is exactly it. You can say, you work for, you can say you're involved with whatever
The
suits the
cause.
purpose. Right.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
often just say I'm with, or I'm involved with the Oakville Hospital Foundation.
Right.
And, you know, it's a and then there's often ways to weave in, you know, if they continue to show interest,
Mm-hmm.
did you know that social housing or the hospital uh, doesn't get, it's not, healthcare is not fully funded
Right.
anywhere in Canada.
Right.
The government funds can only go so far. I think that's pretty clear for everybody.
Right.
Um, and
Right.
so we exist to help fill a gap.
Right.
And that is my passion. That's what helps me get up and go each day, and seeing the difference that we can make. And if that sounds like something of interest, I'd love to chat with you more.
And then you also you work more on the other end now, which is managing money coming in. And really, in a way, it was interesting because we've had many conversations about evaluation and stuff like that, and impact and in community. And definitely one of the things I do a lot of is helping organizations to figure out, okay, why do you exist? What are you trying to accomplish? What change in community do you want to create? And then how do you figure out whether you're actually doing the things that you say you want to do? And how are you measuring that? What are your indicators of, and so on? So can you just talk about the other side of things a little bit that you're more so on now, and like how you identify what the goals of the hospital foundation are, what the strategic places that you're looking for people to contribute to help make a difference in, and so on, and how you make sure the money is going where it needs to go.
Sure. Well, so for a hospital, the blessing uh, is that you have a whole organization of people that know what is the and are responsible for what is needed next to deliver the care that they provide in the community. So hospital foundation takes their direction from the hospital so those goals and needs are set. And it's our job to be that community connection between the two and help to find ways to fund the gaps that are not covered. So for instance, right now, we've got shelled space that we want to outfit for more inpatient beds. We've got to replace CTs and MRIs for diagnostic imaging, and we would love to create a radiation bunker for our cancer program. So those are all key initiatives at the hospital that they give us. So then we're strategizing to say, who in our network might know that what we know that has interest in those areas, or um, or who do we know that could introduce us to people that we've seen are interested in these areas, or have given to similar organizations in other parts of the province or nearby, that maybe if we had an introduction, we could investigate whether or not they are interested in and willing to consider an organization and do something similar for more impact.
And you've been doing this for a while, so I'm just curious, what are some changes or innovations you've seen over time related to fundraising, like how things have shifted or changed, or have they?
I think that relationships are relationships, and that is the basis of everything. So that part is never going to change. The It's a people conversation. But that being said, where the innovations are happening now are really in AI and technology, and how can technology help take some of the more, I would hate to use the word mundane, but there are tasks that are mundane. You know, how can we, when I first started, people were going to the bank each day to deposit, right? So now you've got a check scanner sitting on the desk. How can you use technology in the nonprofit world that people are definitely using in the for-profit side, that can really take those free up those resources so you have more time to focus on the good parts that's showing the impact. The favorite part of my job is not looking at the dollars in the bank and seeing how we can invest them. It's talking with the hospital to say, okay, so you got the CT scanner in last month. How many patients have you been able to see? Have you caught any interesting diagnosis, or something faster than you would have been able to before? Like, what are some of those highlights for you? And it's
Well,
just really great to hear.
I was going to say, I imagine that helps then on the other side, to be able to tell those stories of success and impact and change. Um, and another friend of mine, and I'll put a link to the video somewhere, but had a conversation with Andy Horsnell, who's an expert in social enterprise stuff. But we were also talking about innovation, and he has this, I call it Andy's law of the diffusion of innovation diagram and so on, because I got it from Andy, but it's not actually Andy's. But there's this whole thing about the diffusion of innovation, that if you can get the early adopters will jump in no matter what, because they're keen. And then there's a bit of a chasm, and you're like, ugh. And then the next group, the early majority, really, they're looking for evidence. They're looking for some kind of story of impact or making a difference. And then they'll come in and get involved in something or take up an innovation. But in this case, within the context of whether it's fundraising or recruiting volunteers or any kind of sort of resource development, the idea of, even for other community organizations who are reporting back to a funder, to a foundation, to a government, to their donors, those people want to hear stories, and then you want them to be able to pass on those stories as well, and sort of, make it something. Seth Godin, who I'm a big fan of, his first book they wrote was Purple Cow. It had to do with marketing and being a purple cow, and the whole thing was, when he talks about being remarkable, it's about being worthy of being remarked on. Like it's about being worthy of someone making a remark about you, is what remarkable is all about. So figuring out those remarkable stories and those stories of impact and change, I think it would seem to me that it's really important to have those, to then be able to feed to other people who maybe might not be the first ones to give, or the first ones in to jump in, or the first ones to volunteer. But when they hear those stories, then they're like the early majority. They're more likely to get involved in whether it's giving money or being a volunteer or whatever kind of engagement you're looking for. Would you
Exactly.
agree with that?
Absolutely. And I would say that's actually following that model of that Andy is using is and incorporating is really the best way to um, grow your success in your fundraising as well, because you if you think about starting off with those early adopters, so you really want usually a campaign, a traditional campaign would for fundraising towards meeting a goal would be to start with quietly having quiet conversations with people that you know are going to be early adopters, or have the most likelihood to jump on board. And so you build those early successes and gather a bit of a groundswell. And then the majority sees the early adopters and go, oh, okay, well, it's working well for them and they're engaged. So I want to be part of a successful story. And then you gain your groundswell there. And then you've got people that want to come in at the end and help you bring it home.
Right.
So you want to plan for them as well.
And then there's also just, can you talk about the role and importance of recognition of people,
Sure.
whether it's giving money or being a volunteer in some way? Because I think in addition to fundraising, volunteer recruitment and retention is a crucial issue for many
Yes.
community organizations. And I would say, yeah, like recruitment, to me, you want to start out small. You don't want to ask people for too much. You want to grow it very carefully, almost a similar, and I would imagine the money thing can be very similar unless someone's a multi-millionaire or something. But and then there's the retention, and this could be people who've given money before, but it can also be like, I see many similarities between fundraising and what we've been talking about, and volunteer recruitment and retention. And
Yes.
retention of volunteers, I think, is a critical issue. I think we often burn volunteers out, or there's conflict. And like, I know myself, if I'm in the middle of a lot of conflict and I'm a volunteer, I'm like, I don't deal with this, and I'm gone,
Yeah.
gone. So conflict and burnout, I think, are two critical issues in how you uh, mm, not manage, but uh, pay attention to those relationships, which again are relationships, whether it's to do with money or to do with volunteering.
I agree that it comes down to that it's all relationships. So you, as a volunteer, you want to be engaged, you want to have your opinion be um, wanted.
Heard,
You want to feel
respected.
heard, respected. You want to contribute, and sometimes people do things for a variety of motivations. So going back to that piece, the number one reason people do anything is because they're asked. So people want to be asked to volunteer. They would like to be asked to consider a donation. They'd like to be respected for whatever their answer is. But you want to ask, and you want to recognize whatever their response is, and their contributions if they get engaged and get involved. What are their contributions? If I've got people involved in volunteering, I need to be making sure that I am checking in with them regularly to ask opinion, to ask, do you think this would work? Can I, uh, if they're looking to help open a door for a new potential donor, uh, you know, how can we work together but I need to listen to their advice on how best to approach it, because it's their connection. So being able to really engage people and honor what they can bring to the table, but also honor when they're done, because as a volunteer, and especially in fundraising or any other organization where you're giving of a resource of yourself, whether it is connections in your network to open doors, or just your energy. There's only a finite amount that is possible to give, and the organization needs to be respectful and aware that people don't volunteer forever. They're
Yeah,
they're there for a reason and a season.
a reason and a season. I like that. And it's can you talk to the conflict piece a little bit? Because I think that's something that's often, whether you're staff or you're a volunteer yourself within an organization. And I mean, you can't avoid conflict completely, and conflict isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can mean a diversity of ideas and, different ways of looking at things and so on. But when would you say like conflict goes bad? And do you have any thoughts or tips on how you can manage that conflict? Or if sometimes, and sometimes I think you can't. Sometimes I think a person needs to go if they're causing too much. And I think there's a lot more organizations using like community guidelines, or board members of code of conduct. And I
Yes.
think those are really important things. And if people don't have those things in their organization, they should.
Mhm.
And I'll put a resource below to a site called Good Governance, or Governing Good. That's the name of it, by a friend of mine and mentor, and former teacher, professor, Grant McDonald, who is amazing. He does a blog. He's retired, but he still does stuff. But he was in charge of the nonprofit leadership program at Dalhousie that I went through before I did adult ed and my master's and so on. But yeah, so like it's really important to try and think of those things ahead of time, I think, and in your bylaws, so you can have ways if you really need to get rid of someone because they're just causing too much trouble, you're losing people, or other people are complaining, or they're just not being constructive in how they present their ideas or whatever.
Yeah.
But also, you know, there are opportunities to manage conflict as a staff person or as a key volunteer. And even like if you're dealing with people who have a lot of money, they are used to being able to express their opinion and not probably often be obeyed. So, you know, I can imagine there's some sensitive situations that can come up, and yeah, even that anybody that could learn from dealing with those kinds of personalities, right? And in
Yeah.
how we manage conflict within community organizations and so on.
I think there's all of those elements, you know, there's a lot more awareness in today's world, you know, things like that, like privilege and power and microaggressions and how all of those things come to bear in a conversation. But the reality is still the basics of respect and authenticity. And I think the code of conduct is really important for an organization and for people that for an organization and for anybody in this relationship business, in any kind of relationship business, that pre-planning is where that's why more than half the job is the planning. The execution is, you know, at most a third of the job. So you need to plan out whether we're having a board meeting or a committee meeting, or you're going to talk with a volunteer about a potential donor that they could introduce you to. You've got to know ahead of time what what are your objectives? What are you trying to get out of it? What is each person's role um, in the conversation? What do you expect that people may um, where they may be coming from in a conversation, especially if you're at a board meeting, for instance. And that's where um, as as we plan, you know, we have 3 or 4 pre-board meetings to plan out, you know, how we want everything to go.
Mm.
Before we go into it, for instance, or a committee meeting. And as we train our new leaders in our organization, we spend a lot of time bringing them in, pulling back the veil of leadership, as we say it, to show them how we think through the agenda and, you know, and reading materials or any of those pieces, how you present things, what your speaking points are going to be, practice them. And if you think there's going to be any dissenting um, not dissenting views, if you're, but something that's going to strike somebody as by surprise or not meet their expectations, perhaps are ways because unmet expectations is where you get frustration and then perhaps some bad behavior. In it, or what can come across to in different people's perception as bad behavior because they're dealing with their own surprise. So how can you avoid all of that in your preparation to be able to, for any of these pieces? So if I was going to meet with a donor, and we're kind of along the way in the conversation, for instance, I would say, you know, it's permission based, we call it. So you get permission to proceed to the next step along the way. You know, would you be interested in hearing more about it? Great. Would you be interested in coming for a tour of the building? We've got this really cool, you know, piece of equipment that we got in. I would love to introduce you to the lead doctor that runs it. And, you know, so we're doing these behind the scenes tours. If you're interested, happy to invite you to come in. Yes, great. Then you have permission to proceed. Would you be open to a proposal? Great. Yes, fantastic. And what would the appropriate range be? You know, we as an organization are looking for gifts of this particular size. Does that, how does that resonate for you? Is that in a range that you would be open to considering, or is there a different range that we should bring you some ways that you can make a difference for?
Yeah, and I imagine you guys use volunteers a lot too. So it's not just about asking for money, it's also
That's right.
asking people for their time, to use their connections to help refer people. And yeah, going back to a key thing you said, and for volunteer recruitment, it's always, people, if people are, that's the number one way people become involved in an organization, is when they are asked.
That's right.
If they are not asked, they don't know that they could be needed, or that their resources or skills or whatever could be useful, or that this could be something interesting for them. And then I think the key is start small, low commitment. Don't ask for them to, oh, would you like to be chair for 3 years or something like, like start with, would you like to be on, come to a meeting? Would you like
Yeah,
to, work on a particular project for a couple of months, or a particular event or something? And then as they grow in interest and if they seem more interested, then you can introduce them to other opportunities, I guess
that's right.
is the way I would think of it. But can you talk a little bit more about your guys' own recruitment and retention strategies in terms of volunteers?
Yes, I know I went back to the donor as the example from the
That's okay.
volunteers. So what we do with volunteers is we very much try and let them check us out and us check them out. That mutual "do we want to dance together" conversation through committee work. So our finance committee, our event organizing committees, those are good ways that people can get engaged and find out more about the organization in a manageable way for them. So not having too many meetings, making sure we do an orientation session ahead at the beginning to orient them to the organization and the role of the particular piece that they're involved in. The talk about the time commitment up front, that terms of reference should absolutely include, what's the expectation on your time? Some people like to go to meetings, a lot of people these days hate to go to meetings. So, gone are the days when people are excited about having board meetings once a month for 10 months of the year. No thanks. Right?
Yeah, and I think how those meetings happen and how efficient they are, how effective they are, is really important. And a lot of people don't, like, people underestimate how important the good crafting of an agenda is,
Yes.
to be able to
Yes.
manage time, to make sure you're not trying to pack too much into a meeting, that you roll over, that people have a clear understanding, okay, these are the topics, but also not trying to pack too much in. Because when people feel like they're just being asked to either to rubber stamp things, and there isn't enough, I find often in meetings that I'm a board member or a committee member in, I get really frustrated if there isn't enough time for me to share my thoughts and to be heard, and for there to be question and answer and discussion of a particular topic. And some topics are more operational and more just like, okay, any questions about the finance report? Pretty straightforward. Okay. And we move on. There are other things that are more strategic. And when I was president of the Canadian Community Economic Development Network, CEDNET, and orientation you mentioned, when a new board member came on, the ED and I would actually meet with them as an individual, and we would explain not just the public stuff about the organization, but a little bit about where things were at behind the scenes, what were some key
Hmm.
topics or strategic issues that were being discussed, you know, not naming names or anything, but necessarily, but just so they're aware and so they can hit the ground running that much more
Right.
quickly. And
That's right.
also so that they feel prepared and they can ask any questions. Because I know most people, not me now, but most people, when they start on a board, especially if they haven't done it before, or if it's a different area of work in a community, are kind of tentative at first. They're not going to ask a lot of questions because they're sort of like, well, maybe that's already been asked or that's already been addressed or whatever. And so having that early orientation, I think is a really important thing, and having a process for that orientation worked out ideally, whether it's a board member or other people or other volunteers coming on board or whatever. And then the other thing is the ED and I would always get together before a board meeting, to craft the agenda together. And at one point we got to a point where we were like, okay, this meeting is going to be more of an operational meeting to deal with all the little things you got to tick the boxes for, and all the fiduciary responsibilities and managing money and staff and all that kind of stuff. And then we alternated that every other meeting was a strategic meeting. So we were discussing things more broadly, like what is our purpose? What are we trying to actually accomplish? How are we doing with diversity and inclusion, with membership and so on? How are our memberships numbers going up or down or staying, or what resources do we need if we want to accomplish this? Those kinds of much more open, discussion oriented type topics. And it really worked well. And you don't necessarily have to do it every other meeting. Maybe it's once a quarter, or maybe it's once a month, or whatever. But I find a lot of organizations get really focused on operational stuff, and they don't leave enough time for that more strategic conversation. And Grant McDonald has a really great blog on his site called Governing Good, and it has to do with a bus. And at the back of the bus is the fiduciary responsibilities. You're trying to look after all the back end kind of basic HR, operational, financial things that you're responsible for as a board member or whatever. And then you go to the front of the bus is about strategy, and it's about where are we going and looking ahead. And then he actually takes it a step further and talks about people getting off the bus. And I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on what maybe that's about.
Um, People getting off the bus are either people that are uh, needing to step away or finishing their term, is what I take from it. But depends on in the conversation. People can get on and off the bus in their engagement throughout. Is that
Yeah.
what he's talking
So
about?
it's more about, yeah, more within, I mean, good point, but within his analogy, or metaphor, it's about getting off the bus and going to talk to people in
Uh,
your community. So as a board member, I have a responsibility for fiduciary responsibilities, the back end, the HR, the money, all that kind of stuff. I have a responsibility for looking forward and figuring out the strategic direction for the organization and where we need to go. And that involves looking around at what's going on around us, like an environmental scan, or, strengths, weaknesses, a SWOT, or a SOAR, strengths, opportunities, aspirations. But to figure out that, I also need to, or the organization needs to, get off the bus sometimes and actually talk to people in community, do engagement in the community to find out what the community wants, or people in the community think the organization should be doing. So it's about engaging different stakeholders. It could be members, it could be funders, it could be, I'm just wondering, do you guys do that much?
we absolutely talk with each of our board members and committee members about their role to be bringing up the hospital and the foundation wherever possible in their
Being
lives.
like ambassadors, but
They're
also like a
ambassadors, their ambassador role.
collecting information.
That's right. And bringing information back to us for sure, but also spreading our messages. At the grocery store, wherever there are signs where it could possibly come up,
Yeah.
ease that message in there. That is a huge part of a board of directors role. Those insights and foresights. Yeah.
Well, and I think engagement too. People often think of engagement, or whether it's fundraising, volunteer recruitment, or whatever, of talking at or to people and not necessarily asking questions like,
Mhm.
oh, yeah, I'm on the board. I'd love to know, what do you think the hospital should be focusing on right now? Or what do you think is the biggest issue in healthcare? Or, those kinds of questions where
Yep.
you're asking someone to engage with you. You're not just talking at them.
Not, not just talking to you need to be curious. You need to be curious about what they're thinking because that's how you engage people.
Yeah,
Curious and open.
that's a really good way of putting it, is just being curious, and then seeing where things
Mhm.
go from there. But certainly I love this bus metaphor of
The
grants
bus
because
metaphor is awesome. One of the resource, and I want to look that up after the after we're
I'll
done
send you the
talking.
link.
Excellent. So one of the things that we use a lot is resources like on good governance. So the Institute of Corporate Directors has lots of sessions on governance and the role of being a volunteer and a board of director in particular. And here in Toronto, Rotman School of Business has a great governance program, training program, and we have gone through that, and we've sent several of our board of directors to that session and brought in them as speakers, either virtually or in person, back in the day. And they've done a great job in helping. I think one of the things that people need to understand that when you become a board of directors and what the role of the board versus the role of management is a big
Mm,
thing. And so, a board has generally one employee. It's the executive director, and
yeah.
then everybody else is the executive director's staff.
Yes.
And so they only should be involved in HR issues regarding the executive director.
Yeah. Yeah.
So depending on, I find from different organizations that can be one of the things where you get too much in the operational weeds. So that this
Yeah.
expression of eyes in, hands out as a board member is a really important one for people to keep in mind as they're riding the bus.
Yeah. And also it's yeah, I learned so much from Grant going through his programs, but there are also things like, and this is, and it would be interesting to hear your thoughts too on like leadership versus management. But I think this point about what is the role of a board member or a committee member, and them understanding that clearly and knowing what the boundaries sort of are, and thinking in terms of, in when I would do a lot of governance education over the years, I'd often be explaining there's a working board. You can be, and it's not like a right or wrong, but know what kind of board you are. And like
Mhm.
working boards are often boards where there is no staff, and the board members and volunteer, they do all
Right.
work. And it's usually a stage of an organization when you're just getting going. And so you have
Yes.
no money for staff or anything. And
Yep.
so board members are doing governance, but they're also doing everything else. And
Yep.
then there can be what's called a management board, where so you're graduating a little bit. You might have one staff member, not even an ED, maybe it's a coordinator or something like that. And then so still board members are still heavily involved in management and day-to-day operations and activities and so on. And then there's policy boards, where, and even a particular model of a policy board is a policy governance board, which is a particular model. Name's not coming to me. Eric Carvery, maybe. I'll put a link to the book down below. But that's a very specific model, and people sometimes get confused. They think, oh, you have to do it the Carvery. Yeah, Carvery, I'm pretty sure.
Carver?
Carver. Maybe it's Carver.
I think it's Carver.
The
I remember us talking
his
about
way. Yeah.
yes.
And it's like, no, that you can be a policy board and you could use some elements of that particular model, which is many, many years old now. But there's still some good things. But you can, a policy board in general is exactly that. You have an ED, that is the board's only employee, and then all other employees report to the ED, and the ED is responsible for them, unless there's some issue with the ED, and then you have some process for people to go to HR committee or something like that to deal with it. But this concept of board members only communicating with the ED, and then the ED communicates and gives direction to the rest of the staff, that is a policy governance model. And not a lot of people understand that model, or they've come, depending on their background. So this is, again, where the orientation comes in as a really important part of things, so that people understand, oh, well, this is this kind of board, this is the way we work, this is the way we make decisions, this is the way, if you have a disagreement or you want to express a particular opinion, again, this code of conduct, making sure people sign off on all that is a big part of this, right? And yeah, so figuring out how to, I think that's a big part of it. And then another thing that I learned that was really important for my own learning about things is this idea of minimum specifications. So the idea is, especially with a policy board, the board is identifying what the goals for the organization is. And this is very much Carver's model as well. And then you identify any worries or concerns. And those are the things, like, in pursuit of the goals, we do not want you to do this. And so the idea for the board is to identify, yes, here are the big strategic goals and vision and purpose and all that. But at the same time, you don't want a board to be too prescriptive with an ED or staff, because you want to enable them to use as much creativity as possible in pursuit of those goals. But at the same time, you need to identify clearly certain things that you would not want them to do in pursuit of those goals. So for instance, we do not want you to go into a deficit. You know, the budget, you need to, and ideally, some people think that budget has to be very, very specific. Really, you identify in a policy governance model, you identify policies like, you must go after these end policies, these end goals, and you must not, for instance, run a deficit, which are called executive limitation policies. And then there are some other types of policies, but those I think are two of the most important ones. And a lot of people get confused and get really mired in the weeds. And it's like, no, you're really, if you're doing that, you're really limiting innovation and creativity in the people you're asking to do the work.
You.
Yeah, does that make sense? Or
absolutely. I think one of and setting that, talking about that scope, what the scope of this board is, what the cultural norms are, the beliefs, where they get engaged and not get engaged. That's all part of that orientation, both in the interview process for bringing on a new board member, and then when they startup. One of the things we also do is assign them a board buddy. So every new
Oh,
board member gets a board buddy that's been on the board for at least a year, preferably two. And we also have a staff liaison. So when you're talking about a board of a fundraising organization, they're not necessarily just, it depends on, again, it depends on the organization. They may not be just speaking with the ED because they may be assigned a staff solicitor, a staff liaison that's going to work with them on their particular network. And we can only do so much. You're going to divvy up the board members, and also the right person doing the work with the board members. So some people get along better with certain people than others. So you really want to keep that aspect in mind too, so that everybody is set up for their best success.
yeah. So let's go maybe circle back for a minute to this concept of leadership versus management. Because we've had extensive conversations about leadership before, and learnings over the years, because it really is something I think maybe some people start out raring to go as leaders, but to me, really, leadership development skills, I strongly believe anybody can be a leader, but learning the skills, learning the mindset of a leader versus manager especially is usually something I think that comes over time and is developed over time. But
I think as we grow, and there's certainly, I'm a, with our organization, we're a big fan of leadership character traits. Uh, and that we learned from the Ivy School of Business. They have their executive program. They've done a lot of research into what makes a leader, and it's not necessarily that people are born with it. They have set out, there's skills, and there's different pieces, but one of the defining pieces of being a leader from their research is these 12 characteristics. And it's everything from empathy and drive and judgment. Judgment sits in the middle of of their model. And leaders they call on different character traits depending on the situation.
mm-hmm.
And um, but they're all important. And then part of their research and their education is ways that you can, as an individual, you can look at where your strengths are in those characteristics, and they've got resources on how to build up some of the ones that maybe we're not as strong on. And one of the things our leadership team has done is not necessarily recruited for this, but we have very complementary. We have certain characteristics that we're strong in together, and others where, one person is very strong on drive, and, she's money in, and I'm, moved more into the operations piece, and I have more of a strength on the empathy side, and bringing some of those pieces together, which makes me a good fit for the HR topics um, and those kind of things. So it's very, it's very complementary. You want to make sure both in leadership and also going back to your point about having not being able to you can't shy away from conflict. Conflict exists everywhere. So you need to have the skills to be able to deal with conflict and recognize that conflict in healthy conversations can bring those different points of view that are very valuable to consider in a decision. And if everybody
And
agrees, you just have a bunch of sheep, or a 6-year-old soccer game where everybody's following the one ball, and you're not ever going to, yeah.
well, and you might not develop the new ball. You know what I mean? Like if you do not have diverse perspectives in your organization, and if you do not have systems for making sure you're hearing those diverse perspectives, so this is starting to get into inclusion a little bit, and diversity, but you know, the idea, if you do not have those, you're not going to be able to be as innovative as you might otherwise, because if everybody's thinking the same thing, then where are you going to get any new ideas? Or how are you going to know that maybe you're missing something? There's a gap somewhere that needs to be addressed or something. And certainly, like for myself, you know, as a person who has lived experience with a disability, and you know, I live with a mental illness called bipolar disorder, but like I find that a real strength. And like I'm on a board right now for Compass Nova Scotia Cooperative Homes, which is a cooperative housing organization here in Nova Scotia. And yeah, I try to be as polite as possible and to respect others' thoughts and opinions. But if I have a thought about inclusion from my lived perspective, I will bring it up. I also try to act as an ally or advocate for other groups that are marginalized in some way, because I've done a lot of work with different groups who do work with many different types of populations who are marginalized in some way, and are often not included in different conversations at different tables, and in particular often at board tables. And it can be hard at the board level too to try and have representatives of every perspective and every point of view and everything. So that, which is another reason for getting off the bus occasionally and having like a public meeting or something where you invite people so you can get a broader range of perspectives, because you can't always do it just through your board. And of course, staff is an important part of that as well. Can you just talk a bit more about like how you see leadership as being different than management? Because that seems to be a popular topic these days, is this question of leadership versus management, even though I think everybody can be a leader, but there are also maybe some people who have aptitudes and interests that are more on the management side than the leadership side. The leadership, I think, is a particular way of thinking about things. And just before I forget, the idea of situational leadership, I really like that you mentioned that, because that's certainly something, when I learned about that, really opened my eyes to the idea that you can have different styles of leadership. And there can be moments when it's appropriate to be a very directive leader. Like if you're a surgeon in the operating theater, you're not going to use a coaching or consulting or softer style leader. You're going to be like, I need this to happen now. Or like there's been, you know, an accident. It's not, hey, could you call 911 and, you know, get back to me about that? It's like, you go call 911, call me back and tell me when you've done it. You know, it's a very directional way of doing things. And there is a time and place for that. And then there's more of a coaching style leadership, which is more the other, like, oh, what do you think about that? Or why, where are you looking to go with this? And it's more of a supportive style of leadership, softer, a little softer, maybe. But I'm just curious your thoughts on, yeah, leadership versus management. And then also if you have any further thoughts on the whole situational thing.
So for me, management is kind of overseeing the day-to-day, making the day-to-day operation type stuff happen. And that really is that manager level. The leader is where you're bringing in vision and vision and direction and gathering people to point them at that North Star. That is that is the biggest role, to get people going in the same direction to achieve the goal. And that, more than anything, I think, is the leadership. And that leadership comes with those characteristics of caring, and trying not to leave people behind, but also driving to get to the goal at the speed you need, and the wisdom to bring in those use your resources wisely and bring those pieces in, and the judgment to balance all of that. So to me, and knowing when to use those skills and when not to. There was one interesting session that we had done uh, in leadership training on, it was called Hercules versus Buddha. So it was looking at, Hercules, when you think of the cartoons, he's the brawn, he's the, okay, I'm just gonna go push through and get this done. And that is one aspect, but then the other is that softer sitting back and, well, what do you think? And when do you use each piece of those strategies? And when do you hold back? And when is going to be most effective? And it's really the judgment of what do you need to get the best out of your team? And when
I,
you employ it in different situations.
I was going to say, was there um, a particular moment in your journey to getting to where you are, um, or even personally, where you were like, it was a major sort of epiphany, or if there was a moment of like, ah, this is about a learning, basically.
I think this, for me, I've done a few different types of leadership education, and this piece about the character traits, and the when do you push, and really employ one, pull back on another. That it's all about the situational leadership. It's, that's the basis of, I would say, that's the basis of our culture in our organization today. And we're lucky to have an organization with very low turnover. We've doubled our revenue results in the past 7 years. We have uh, we have people that leave to try out new opportunities and come back because they go and they say, "Oh, we didn't realize how good we had it with the people and the leadership while we were here. And please, can I take the first opportunity to get back in?"
Yeah,
So
and
we've
that's
had
a big one,
multiple
because
people.
staff retention and recruitment and turnover, and making sure the right person is in the right role with the right aptitude and skills. And then recognizing too, even while I say I strongly believe anyone can be a leader, that
Yes.
doesn't mean they're necessarily ready to be a leader immediately. I do believe there's a process of becoming a leader, of learning those skills,
Yep.
when to use them, how to use them in different contexts, different settings.
Yep.
That is something that comes more with experience, practice, time, that sort of thing. Yeah.
And I would say everybody can be a leader, and our leader is leaders in certain situations. And then there's lots of people that are not interested in being a leader for the majority of their time. They would prefer
And
to
that's okay
follow,
too.
and that's okay. You need both,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
in any
Maybe they're more of a
organization and
manager,
cause.
or they're just I just want to do. I have a friend right now who's um, in a senior position in a community organization that's very demanding. And then she also works part-time at our local pharmacy. And it's partly to get her out of the house and away from people, just to get a break, right? And she loves it because she doesn't have to think. She just fills orders, does the thing, and it's like it's almost like just a chance for her to get away from the major level of responsibility of her leadership position, um and just sort of turn that part of her brain off for a bit.
Yes.
And yeah, I think, and different people are ready for different things at different times in terms of their capacity, in terms of, I mean, any of us can end up with a mental health challenge at any time, or a physical challenge, or an injury, or there's an illness in a member of our family, or something happens. And so this idea of a sense of fluidity, where some people may be ready to step up or do certain things at certain other people, it's more appropriate to do something else. Other people, they need to step back and just look after themselves and their family members. And I, you know, sort of that heal thyself thing, or remembering the oxygen thing, dropping down from the airplane and put it on yourself first before you do. Like, I think there's a lot of burnout is a big issue for our sector. And we really need to respect and understand our own needs, our own well-being, and what we need for that to be part of an organization or a cause. And just in general, I don't think we think enough about our own well-being and what we need to be doing to take care of that. And in our sector, there's a sense of urgency, like everything is urgent. We need another MRI because people are dying. We need housing because people are dying. We need, you know, like everything is a crisis often, and so urgent. And you feel like, oh, I gotta help out, especially for people who have so much empathy. There's this, and yet we also need compassion, not just for others, but for ourselves, in a sense that we need to really understand when and how we can contribute, and that it's okay to also step back and or slow down and to let others pick up the reins a little bit, and that people often have a sense too that, oh, if they step down, who's going to do all this? Someone will step up. If it's a worthy enough cause, if it's important enough, someone will step up. I've been in that situation where it was hard to step down, but I really needed to, and worried that this organization I had helped create would fall apart. And good for me and my ego was to learn it did not fall apart. Lots of other people stepped up, and it's still going. There's so many organizations that I've been involved in helping to create and contribute to, and then also organizations I've stepped away from, and they're still going strong. If anything, they are maybe doing even better. They're, you know, so really understanding that sense of self and your capacity. And yeah, I wonder your thoughts on that.
I feel like that's one of the big epiphanies that that people need to have as they develop into a leader. That there are many times when you have to let go of things that you have that you have done, and let other people give it a try. Because one, you need to train the next people. You know, this is a one-way trip. Everybody is aging in one direction. We have that in common. It's the one thing we have in common with every person on this planet. We're all going on a one-way trip through life. So sooner or later, you're going to come to an end of the time when you have that capacity. And do you want to engage people and share with them and give them a chance to be heard so that they are engaged and want to keep participating in this organization and believe and feel worthy and feel valued? Or do you want to be the one that's telling them what to do and they're disengaged and they're not as satisfied? And maybe they're going to be looking for other jobs and then you have crappy retention. So it's a huge epiphany that people need to have. And I think that is one of the big shifts that I've had over um, the past few years. And there are many things that um, I've had in my career that because I've been here for so long, the things that I've been known for and had this is like a big piece of what I do that I identify with and feel valued for. And it is reassigned to somebody else because I need to uh, because there's no growth in comfort either. So for me to grow, I need to let go of some of the things that I've been doing and and learn new things and try new things and be uncomfortable. But that's where the growth is
Yeah, and then making space for others
and making space for
and
others.
in this concept of succession planning, which we don't talk about, I don't think, as much as we
Right.
should, that we should be actively planning for us to move on or change our role in some way, and making space for someone new to come in and have that opportunity to learn and grow in the way that we have,
Yeah.
whether it's a volunteer role or a staff role. Yeah, I don't we talking about well-being and self-care is really important, but also recognizing that succession planning is about enabling others to grow. And I think that's a really important part of leadership that we don't often talk about either, is this idea of leaders making space for and supporting and mentoring and enabling others to have the opportunities to grow and become leaders in different ways as well.
Yeah. So I would say in our organization, the reason we have such a great culture and low turnover and doubled our revenue, it is because of exactly what you just said. We are channeling that. We spend easily a good portion of every day of our work thinking about what are we doing and how are we supporting our next generation of leaders and the next round after that. So what are the opportunities? How can we engage them? So we spend a lot of time in our organization explaining and sharing our thoughts on how we got um, how we got to this decision, or just the woes of as a leader. You're there's a lot less structure. There's more ambiguity. The higher up you go, the more ambiguity you have to get comfortable with because there just aren't answers for everything. The CEO's job is to deal with all the gnarly crap that other people haven't already solved. That's what escalates. So to be able to share with the next um, round of people growing up in your organization to say, wow, this is an early one. What do you think? Here's where I'm coming from. Here's where, each of the members of our senior team are coming from. Here's, can't necessarily tell you all the details, but these are some of the aspects that we had to consider. And it's good they need to know. How else are they going to know?
Yeah.
And who do you think is going to be the CEOs in 10 years, 5 years, 10 years, leaders in our community when we're universe willing, sitting on a beach enjoying our hard-earned retirement? Like, do you want it to be
Yeah.
left in good care or not? Like, share the information. That's bring people along.
Yeah.
So, and leaders are found everywhere, and everyone has places. I think going back to one of the things that you were saying, people are leaders in all parts of their lives. And sometimes they don't want to be a leader at work, like your friend that does the pharmacy role, because they're so busy being a leader at home in their domestic, on the domestic fronts. Leaders are needed in all parts of our lives. And when we do leadership training in our organization, we have a staff of 25. All 25 are engaged and get the training. We tend not to have, oh, we're senior leaders, so we're going to go and have a retreat and learn leadership skills. Everybody, we have topics for everybody, and make sure to say, whether you're the group that wanted to organize the Christmas party, or whether you're the group that is out fundraising and engaging volunteers, or whether you're the group that is putting these leadership skills to use at home because you've got, 2 or 3 kids and a partner on the spectrum, like, you put them to use everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to be able to see people grow. And when we think about, we used to hear a lot, well, it's just easier if I do it because it'll take me 3 times as long to stop and explain it to somebody and to show them what to do, and then kind of painfully or not, hope that they do what I told them and get it done. I could just, do it myself in a third of the time. Well, they're not growing. And you're not growing because you're not stepping out of your comfort zone of something that, yes, you could do easily. But just, what are you avoiding by doing that task?
Yeah.
It's interesting there's a lot of self-reflection at this time in my life anyway. And I really value the things that I've learned and continue to learn. And whoever came up with the expression, you learn something new every day. I at least one. I usually learn something new by 10 o'clock in the morning.
Well, and
Off the day.
it's interesting to reflect on some of the things we've been talking about, maybe within a broader context. Like if we're looking to build inclusive, healthy communities, how do we do that? And it's not and there's this thing in innovation circles talking about complicated challenges, maybe even complex challenges, and then like wicked problems or wicked challenges that are more like mysteries than puzzles. And I know you're into puzzles, so but this concept of figuring, like, and this idea of curiosity and how we foster that. And then I'm particularly intrigued to, I haven't delved into this a lot yet, but I have been following Rutger Bregman and his books for a while. So he's the historian who was at the World Economic Forum at Davos, who years ago was like, look, all of you billionaires with your jets and so on, the answer to the question is taxes, taxes, taxes. We need to charge you wealthy people more tax so that it's redistributed to people who need it, or that we're evening things out more. And that's the answer to world peace, really, is, to make sure everyone's doing okay. And, everyone has a right to not just housing and stuff, but like well-being and being respected as a human being, and whatever your aspirations are for you, for your family, for your community. So he's got this new thing called the School for Moral Ambition. So he's all about asking, I think he's aiming mainly at young people, but this idea of, look, we don't just need another widget. We need people to be looking at these wicked problems in our society, in community, climate change, world peace, the UN, like what's happening at the UN, and things that are happening with different wars and so on around the world, and how we deal with that. And questions recently even about, is the UN still relevant? Is the UN still useful? And actually the president of Finland, can't remember the name, but he in a video was talking a lot about how relevant the UN really still is. And also, I think she was Nobel Peace Prize winner, is Reza Marks, maybe. She spoke at the UN, and I'll try and find links and put all these video links in the description below. But, you know, she really talked about how important it is for us to come together, and that we only solve these kinds of wicked problems or challenges when we come together and have dialogue and you know, really listen to each other and hear what others people's concerns or problems or pain is. And then, as Jacinda Ardern, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, would say, you know, with that empathy, this idea of empathetic leadership and this idea of which I think she's doing a fellowship teaching at Harvard or something, and she has a new documentary and book coming out. But this idea of being a empathetic leader, and then what does that mean for anyone in community at any level? Which, but and I don't. A lot of people feel overwhelmed. A lot of people feel like, oh, I can't make a difference. This too big, too wicked, too challenging. I don't even know where to start. And yet at the same time, if each of us were to do something meaningful in whatever way we can, that adds up, right? So this idea of building inclusive, healthy communities with well-being for all really at the core, I feel like that's such an important thing. But at the
Yes.
same time, I know I can't do everything. So I have to pick my lane and where is the best way that I can contribute at this moment? And in what way is the best way that I can contribute that's good for me, that means I'm still doing something meaningful, I'm still contributing. But yeah, I just wonder, I know I covered a lot of stuff there. That's, you know me.
I
can go really big, really fast. But I'm just curious, any thoughts on any of that?
I completely agree. Whether you're working on world peace or you're working on world peace in your home, or with your group of 4 people, like, community is of all sizes. And I think having all of the principles that you just said in whatever community level that you're working on at that moment is the way to succeed.
Yeah, because you and I have done a lot of different things over the years.
Mhm.
And we've had some deep conversations about this, you know, and we were Girl Guide leaders together. So I
Yes.
think, like, one of the places where we learned a lot was in as Girl Guide leaders and working with different ages of girls, but really having this aspiration of wanting to help support girls and women to
Mhm.
be leaders, but in whatever way works for them. But this idea, and I think Rutger Bregman has a similar sort of mindset, but obviously from a different origin point. And he's Dutch and he's very blunt. I understand the Dutch are quite honest and rather blunt sometimes. So he says exactly what he's thinking. But yeah, this idea of I do like the idea that he's raising, that we don't need just another widget. We need people to aspire to make the world a better place for everyone.
Mhm.
And like, for me, that was a big attraction of the Girl Guide movement for me.
Yes.
Was that idea of service and trying to make the world a better place. And yeah, just any other thoughts on that in terms of how do you think, or any ideas on this idea of building more inclusive, healthy communities? And I use the word healthy, I think, a lot, because of my experiences with challenges with well-being, with mental health, and that sort of thing. I really think healthy covers climate change, it covers well-being, it covers financial issues, it covers housing. Like it's a holistic part, and then the inclusion as well. To me, they're two big concepts that I think if we could do more of those two things, ensuring people are included and healthy, that would probably take care of a lot of stuff.
It does. It covers off, letting people feel by having them be included and considered, people feel valued, people feel recognized. Going back to the question that we were talking about earlier about recognition.
Hmm.
You know, people do things for a variety of reasons, but certainly feeling valued is a reason that they continue to be engaged.
So, yeah, thanks very much for this. And we'll talk later.
Talk later.
Okay, bye.
Always. See you.